Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning for those of you joining us from the West Coast. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to attend a session of the right way to select CDP technology from Real Story Group. As you can see, our founder Tony Byrne and our lead researcher in this space, Apoorv Durga, are on the line with us today, and they'll be taking us through the heart of today's presentation, where we'll talk through some strategies around making sure that you're selecting the CDP technology vendor that's the right fit for your needs. As we get started, though, I just want to mention a couple quick housekeeping items of note. I do see some new folks on the line, so please note that we do have a questions tab here in the GoToWebinar control panel. You're welcome to share questions or any feedback that you might have, and we have a couple minutes baked in at the end where you can we'll be able to get back to you on those questions, and we'll email you if for some reason we do run out of time. Also, for everyone attending today, you'll be emailed a copy of the slides, and for our subscribers on the line, a recording of this presentation will be available in your subscriber library over the next few days. So as we get started, just a little bit of history about Real Story Group. We've been at this for 20 years now, and the approach that we've taken throughout that 20 years is one of being completely unbiased or independent when it comes to the relationship we have with the vendors we cover. In that, we don't work with them in any way, shape, or form. Okay, we don't advise them on the strategy or write white papers for them. We sit firmly on the buy side of the table when it comes to technology purchases, and as far as we know, we're the only analyst firm that has taken this approach. And you'll notice that if you ever read any of our research, we're really harsh critics, and fair but firm, I think, is what Tony would say about the different vendors that we cover. So our focus is on helping you find the right technology fits for your needs. And you'll see that on the next slide, we cover a number of different marketplaces that are all focused around the MarTech stack, areas like web content management technology, marketing automation, digital asset management. But today's focus is going to be on the orange line, which is customer data platforms. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Tony to really dive into that a little further. Tony?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think many of you have seen this map before. It's instructive in today's context in a couple of ways. One is, there's a lot of vendors on this orange line. We've actually since added some. We'll be updating this map shortly. So the CDP market is what we describe as a highly fragmented marketplace. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. Fragmented is kind of analyst speak for there's a hell of a lot of vendors to choose from. And like many other marketing technology marketplaces, the line runs through the center of this map where you see a lot of big name vendors as well. And so we'll have some thoughts on that. But the third kind of sub-theme here is that, your CDP must coexist with a number of other lines and stations here. And we have some thoughts around that too. And in fact, that's where my colleague Apoorv is going to be really leading off the whole conversation. So why don't we go ahead and get into it? We'll turn it over here shortly to Apoorv to talk about some key architectural decisions that you want to at least think about up front. You don't have to necessarily firmly 100% make them, but you do need to think about them. Then I'll introduce you to the CDP Marketplace, and then from there we'll segue into really the meat of the conversation today, which is around what's the right way to select one of these platforms, and we'll wrap you up with some key takeaways. So Apoorv, we've got about 3 slides on some key architectural decisions you should make up front, and let's start with CDP within the broader MarTech stack.
Sure, thank you, Tony. So we'll talk a bit about CDP architectures to get the context right. So this slide is essentially RSG's service reference model for MarTech. So you see on the top are engagement channels. These are the channels that a brand uses to interact with users, and then there are some interaction and delivery environments that in turn interact with your content and engagement services. So services like CRM, services like outbound marketing services like product information management, WCM, and so on and so forth. right? So a lot of you will have similar stacks and would be familiar with such stack architectures. Of course, the exact boxes will vary, but the idea will be very similar. Now, traditionally, each of these boxes had their own content, data, and rules, thus creating several silos, each operating on its own. Right, so your WCM had its own content, data, and rules. Your CRM had its own content, data, and rules, and therefore there existed a number of silos in terms of content, data, all of that. But the modern stack addressed this problem by abstracting those content, data, and rules in a separate layer of its own that we call foundation services. So you see the bottommost layer, which is called enterprise foundation services, right? So this essentially abstracting all these into a layer of their own allows you to ensure that your content, data, and rules work in an omni-channel world. So you see on the left you have content services essentially consisting of omni-channel content platform and digital asset management. Then you have the middle column, which is data, which is essentially customer data activation and customer data management. And then finally on the right you have the personalization and journey orchestration under decisioning as part of the overall foundation services. For this session though, we will focus on the data part, which is the middle column here, and that's really expanded in the next slide. So in the next slide, what we see is an expanded view of the customer data layer, right? So recall that typically in a customer data management scenario, you start by ingesting data from scores of 0, first, second, and third-party data sources. So some examples of these data sources are shown on the left of this slide. And once you ingest all of that data, you then apply several data management aspects to this ingested data. So you transform that data, you clean that data, you normalize that data, you create unified customer profiles from that data, and so on. Once you have clean profiles of your users, you then do what is commonly known as activation. You basically activate that data for your downstream marketing activities. So you can segment that data. You can do lightweight calculations such as finding segments based on LTVs or spend or other factors, and then you activate those segments, meaning you use them for personalization, for running campaigns, for doing advertising, for running analytics, and so on. Now, early CDPs wanted to, or at least claimed to do most of these tasks mentioned in these two middle boxes, that is management and activation. So they wanted to do all of those tasks. But as the industry matured, we are now seeing this new model emerging in which these are two distinct categories of services, and they are those are customer data management and customer data activation. So a lot of organizations have an existing data fabric or an existing data ecosystem that consists of things like a data warehouse, a data lake, an MDM, etc. And they are saying we are already doing many of these things elsewhere. So why do we need a CDP to do all those things again? So essentially, think of these as a separate separate set of services or capabilities. You might still do them using a single CDP, but they are logically and functionally separate. And we see several organizations relying on their existing data fabrics or existing data ecosystem to do several of those activities mentioned in the data management box. In fact, we see several variations of this architecture, and we did a webinar exactly on that topic. I encourage you to check that out. It should be available under recorded webinars on our website, and we'll post a link in the chat window as well. Now, CDP vendors have also started to understand that this is happening, which is why many of them now partner with third-party vendors for things like ID resolution and some of the other activities. So anyways, the key takeaway for this slide is that the emerging model of CDP architecture separates out data management and data activation more clearly than it did before. And therefore, you may use a CDP to do both those services or just one of them. This slide further extends that logic in context of our reference architecture. So you see that the CDP can be made to play in areas other than core data activation, right? So while data management is a commonly used capability, at least for some aspects, if not all, a CDP can also provide services for adjacent capabilities such as outbound marketing, or uh, there are several products that come with built-in ESPs. Then the CDPs can provide lightweight personalization capabilities, journey management or organization or orchestration capabilities, and even analytics. So you see, these CDPs can be extended both horizontally as well as vertically beyond their core capabilities, and so it becomes important to scope out what a CDP can and should do for your specific needs. Over to you, Tony, then, to take us through how to exactly do that and how to select the right CDP. Meanwhile, I'll take a look at the questions.
Great, thanks, Apoor. So that's right. You have CDP vendors who have very different notions of scope, and so that's okay. And again, you don't have to be exactly firm around these things going in, but if you want to have a general sense of, as you make any marketing technology decisions, about what fits where in your stack. So, you know, this variety of options for CDP also suggests a quite diverse marketplace, and that's certainly true. And like a lot of emerging marketplaces, this one's really only about 5 years old, maybe 6 at the most. You know, you tend to see a fairly crowded marketplace, and it's divided mostly between the pure play platforms that have been around for a while, and the suite vendors that have more or less recently discovered the need for this sort of capability. So you have a lot of choices here. We tend to think that's a good thing for customers. I know it can seem kind of overwhelming to you, but in our experience watching these spaces for the last 20 years, a highly fragmented marketplace also typically means lots of rapid innovation, some ability to negotiate on pricing, and the possibility of getting a really good match. So the one thing, though, that, you know, we published research on this, so I'm not saying anything that we haven't already discussed, is, you know, we have some cautions around the suite vendors. While their brands may be well known and their salespeople are trying to come in and talk to you and talk to your boss and your boss's boss about dropping in their CDP just on principle, you need to understand their solutions are newer and generally thinner. They tend to be very parochial, and they tend to bind you to other solutions in your stack at just the time when we're suggesting a more composable, fluid, and decomposed sort of strategy. So in our opinion, they're really trying to drag you back at some level, that what's not explicit, but what's really implicit in their architectures is dragging you back into the 2000s, 2010s. So I'm not saying don't license or consider these vendors, but we are throwing up some cautions here. There's a lot more details about this in our research. The other way to look at the market, you know, to Apoor's earlier point, is, you know, is it primarily around data activation or data analytics, or core data management? So you saw that, you know, there was an orange and 2 blue boxes in our stack, and some vendors tend to lean sort of more one way or another, more crowded up towards activation, but some do supply that kind of data management and are often weaker in terms of activation. I wouldn't make too much of this exact cartography because there's a lot of details that can't be included in a slide like this. Like, for example, segment, you know, we've kind of put in the middle, but actually when you look at across their tools, they're kind of a little bit here, a little bit there. So I wouldn't necessarily generate a short list off this. This is just more a way of kind of visualizing the market in a different way. We'll talk a little bit later about just how to get to the right short list. In fact, we'll talk about it now. And I'll remind you that the questions tab is open in the GoToWebinar control panel. And we're already seeing some questions. That's great. And Apoor and I are going to address those at the very end of the session. We'll definitely have time to do that. Let's talk about what's the right way to select a CDP. And I think that, you know, our opinion on this is that there's a right way to select marketing technology, and then you apply that to the specific dimensions of doing this in a specific kind of context of customer data. So there's arguably 5 traditional approaches to evaluating and selecting technology, and of course you're going to hear from us that these traditional ways are really not the best way to do it. So if we start with number 1, love at first sight, we see this we used to see this more often with CDPs, not so much anymore. Oh, wow, I saw this vendor. It can get all of my customer data in a single unified accessible place. Let's just go license it. Some of the early CDP vendors, I think Lytics comes to mind, and some others that, you know, people just license them without thinking about some really critical issues around information modeling, access control, and a number of other issues that are really critical. So love at first sight typically doesn't lead to good long-term relationships in real life, and certainly not marketing technology. The second one we call the my cousin Vinny approach, which is someone in my industry licenses CDP. So if it works for them, maybe it'll work for me. And there are some benefits to vertical focus. I think the vendors tend to over rely on that. But of course, you're a unique company. Just because something works for another company, yeah, means maybe you should investigate if it's not necessarily just going to work well for you. The third one is what we call the horse race phenomenon, and this is actually why I started Real Story Group 20 years ago. It's this idea that there's some magic quadrant that's going to tell you that there's winners and losers here in a generic way, as opposed to explaining to you in context what might be the right fit for you. So our key word is fit, not that there's a winning vendor and a losing vendor, but what's the right fit for you. So this horse race thing, you know, is really for the birds. Now, the fourth one always seems intriguing, and we call this happiness is a stack of warm binders, or in this case, warm Excel sheets. These people, you know, you get companies where they load up tabs and tabs and tabs of Excel sheets with can have, must have, nice to have, and at the end of the day, you don't really end up prioritizing anything. It becomes a very bloodless exercise. You try to make it mathematical, it doesn't work, and in the end, it often leaves you more frustrated than when you started. There's a fifth one that we see in the CDP space, which is, oh, we happen to have a platform lying around that also says that they could do a CDP. Let's just use that. So it's sort of like I have to drill this small hole in a piece of wood, and somebody says, oh, I've got a drill press. So, you know, you end up hauling it out. That doesn't mean it's a particularly good fit for purpose. So you need to be careful there. And you know, in particular, we see a lot of vendors claiming that they're a CDP. You know, in the WCM space, there's been Sitecore and Episerver and others who bundled in a CDP, certain e-commerce vendors for a long time. The outbound marketing campaign served as your marketing database. They said, we're a CDP, your CRM platform. Even today, you'll see Salesforce consultants saying that should be your CDP, so on and so forth. And because at some level, all of these do need a customer data layer, but that doesn't mean that they should be the unified customer data platform for you. And so you need to be careful about just sort of inheriting one that wasn't really meant to serve as an independent layer in your platform. So how do you then get to the right one? And we're going to give you advice that we would give here for any marketing technology. And we feel so strongly about it that after helping organizations do this for 2 decades, my colleague Jared and I wrote a book about this. And it's really about applying design thinking as opposed to waterfall thinking to the selection process. It's very business focused, it's team-based, it's empirical, which means it's test-based, which is so important because that makes it much more hands-on and human. And it's iterative and adaptive. There's some people on the call right now. We're working with them on some selections, and we've had to adapt a little bit to some changes within the organization, some things that we learned midstream. And so having an iterative filtering process allows you to be adaptive. And it also means you don't have to get your requirements perfect up front. And that's so important because particularly if something new like a CDP, I can tell you it's impossible to come out of the gate with perfect requirements, but you can get there through an iterative process. So design thinking typically has 5 steps: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and it turns out this is a really good way of filtering down from 30+ CDP vendors down to 1. So the first thing you want to do is create diverse user stories. User stories are really important. You want to spend more time in Word and less time in Excel. You craft an RFP and vendor shortlist around that. We'll have some ideas around that maybe narrows you down to 6 to 8 vendors. You review proposals and demos among 4 of them. They're not demoing their use cases, they're demoing your use cases. Then get to a hands-on bake-off, really essential. Talk about that in a minute. This last phase, which is an optional POC for the winning vendor before you sign a contract, we found that really important for CDPs. And I'll tell you why, is because this is often when you want to invest in advanced integration and security testing, and that's really critical. And we have sometimes seen issues come up that are worth sort of revisiting. So that last bit of the triangle also. So this is an iterative process. It's an adaptive process. It'll take you 3 or 4 months. longer if you're slow, maybe a little faster if you're quick, but it's worth it because you're going to get to the best fitting solution that you know really, really well. So how do you then vet from 30 down to 4 to 8? And the way we do this in our vendor evaluations is to evaluate fit against business use cases. So we argue that there's 10 canonical business use cases for customer data platforms. Most of you do not need to solve all 10 of these, or at least not from within a CDP. And so, and this is particularly important because a typical CDP vendor only excels at 2, 3, 4 of these, and then maybe has some story around 2 or 3 more. So you really want to prioritize your use cases here. This is what we do in our research, and so this allows you then, using our tools, to generate what we call a real quadrant, which is you put in your use cases. In this case, it's outbound marketing support, omnichannel and offline aggregation, and digital advertising support. So I'm guessing this is probably a B2C type retailer sort of use case over here, leading up to 100%, and then it auto generates a quadrant for you, and you can see there's probably 6 to 8 vendors worth looking at. So this is how we do it, and this is what we make available to our subscribers, and that's what we're suggesting that you do as well, whether you're a Real Story Group subscriber or not, that you come up with your use cases and then vet the vendors against that. Now, one thing I always emphasize is this bake-off, and I'm shocked and dumbfounded by the number of otherwise savvy and experienced large enterprises that don't do this kind of hands-on testing. It's like going and buying a really expensive car, and your only diligence you did was watching the salesperson drive it around the dealer parking lot. No, you need to get behind the wheel of the car. It only needs to be a week each for each vendor, but you want to have real scenarios, some simulated data, real people, real environment. You accomplish 2 things. First, you find out which one is the better fit for you. Secondly, you're really going to understand your requirements, and you're going to be much more successful getting value out of this platform a lot sooner. So it really helps speed your deployment of the winning solution. All right, third bonus, gives you more time and opportunity to negotiate for the right price. A lot of sticky issues around CDP pricing these days, very complicated negotiations that we've been involved in. So you want to give yourself time and space to do that while still a competitive process. Okay, so let's get into the takeaways. And then meanwhile, I know Apoorv is thinking about all of these questions that are accumulating here. So first of all, CDPs are increasingly foundational to a truly omnichannel stack. You knew that, that's why you're here today. But you need to first at least think about the proper scope of CDP in your particular stack. And so really not overbuying or underbuying with respect to where it fits in. CDP Marketplace is likely to remain fragmented for some time. So you've got a lot of good choices out there. The large vendors have decided to jump in because they see the opportunity here, but we think they continue to lag the market. So do think about the architectures that Apoorv mentioned as a filter, but business scenarios should be your prime selection criteria. And since there's many different potential scenarios for a CDP, you want to really prioritize up front. Definitely employ an agile-oriented selection process featuring adaptive testing. In other words, apply design thinking to the problem. And in particular, try before you buy. Always, always, always. It's a little labor intensive. You're going to learn a lot about yourself. You're going to learn a lot about the solution. You're going to go faster to market with a better deal, with the winning solution. And of course, we're always here to help you make the best decisions in your best interest. There's 3 different ways you can engage with us. The first is to just subscribe to our CDP research. That also gives you access to us and our templates and advisory time to help you make a successful decision. Second way some large enterprises work with us is they subscribe to this entire map. They get access to all of our research, and we in turn help them make kind of broader stack decisions. Subset of those have joined this number 3 item down here on the left, which is our private executive council of MarTech stack leaders, where people meet every couple of months and we share lessons learned, share case studies, ask each other questions, help each other out. Hopefully someday in the next year, we'll be transitioning that back to doing that in person, which has been tremendously valuable. I think we'll see what the virus has to say about that. So we've got a lot of questions. While Apoorv and I are digesting those questions, we'll definitely get back to you on them while you're still here. But Scott, you want to just talk about next steps?
Absolutely. If anyone's interested in diving a little bit deeper into a demo of the Real Quadrant application Tony showed you earlier, just drop us a line, explore@realstorygroup.com, and I'd be happy to take you on a behind-the-scenes tour of the Real Story Group subscriber experience. You can download samples from our research if you want to see what we're saying about CDP vendors or any other vendors we cover. Please feel free to download a sample at any time. And I do see some of our Stack Leadership Council members online with us today. So thanks for attending. Just a reminder, our next session is on September 23rd. So if folks want to inquire more about that and what that's all about and learn some more details, let us know. Happy to talk with you more about that group. So with that, you're right, there are several questions that have come in. So I'll let you gentlemen take those away.
Yeah, so Apoorv, I'll run through them and then ask you to answer some of them. So the first one is from Krishna, is asking, when hiring an FTE or contract to implement and run a CDP, what basic skills are required? Well, the first thing I would say, Krishna, is that implementing and running it are two different things. Implementing it, you're certainly going to need developer skills. But either way, whether these are FTEs or not, the sorts of skills that you need to run a CDP go back, first of all, into enterprise data ops. So you've got data integration, data analysts and cleaning. You've got data stewards, data scientists, and so forth. And then on the marketing side, you need marketing analysts and then marketing operations teams. So it's potentially a wide variety of skill sets that are required to really run a customer data ecosystem that is owned a CDP. So what's your view on a CDP as a platform concept versus out-of-the-box product? My question is coming from the fact that with the advent of cloud data warehouses, ETL tools, RETL activation tools, how do we navigate? That's from Jignesh. So Apoorv, what's the difference in your mind between CDP, I guess, as a platform or something I might be able to build myself off these new, like even the so-called lakehouse tools like Snowflake, and Jignesh is asking, how do we contrast that with an actual out-of-the-box CDP product? What's your take?
Yeah, so my take is that even if you buy a product, or it's not an out-of-the-box thing, unlike some of the other marketplaces we cover, right? So you will end up building a lot on a CDP product as well. And we covered some of these aspects in the CDP architectures webinar that I referenced to when I was presenting. So you should check that out. But essentially the idea is that a CDP will almost always end up working with other elements of your data fabric or data ecosystem, and in that sense, whether you buy an off-the-shelf product or not, you will almost always end up building a lot on and in that sense, CDP is always a platform.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is that the build versus buy decision is really build a little versus build a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that, if you wanted to try to assemble one, you could, and we've seen companies do this, and before CDPs, that's what you had to do. What's often missing there, Jignesh, is the marketing touch and the marketing side, is that it takes a lot of person hours to build marketing friendly platforms that allow marketers to do self-service. And that's a big part of what you should be getting in any CDP. So Greg is asking, could you talk to CDPs for B2B and the players there? Do you tend to look at a different short list of vendors for B2C, B2B versus B2C? It depends to some extent, but in general, Greg, I would say yes, it is they tend to be different short lists of vendors. There's commonality now because we're beginning to see B2C take B2B type qualities, like thinking about households and intermediaries and distributors and other non-consumer first-class objects. And so there's some alignment that's happening in the industry, but generally speaking, yeah, there are vendors who can handle large-scale B2B use cases and those that can't. By B2B, I'm assuming you mean, that there's key account objects and things like that, as opposed to just direct to consumer. So there's definitely a difference there. Let's see. Apoorv Krishna is asking, can we approach a CDP implementation project using an iterative approach of 1, 2, 3 instead of purchasing a full-blown product?
Well, so if by that that you mean that you will buy it in a modular fashion and buy multiple modules as the need arises? Yes, that is certainly possible. So a lot of like we covered in earlier slides, CDPs have a lot of functionality, right? So there's some core functionality, and then there are adjacent functionalities, and a lot of times these CDP vendors offer those functionalities via modules. So you can of course buy those modules as the need arises, and scale up as you go forward, if that's the question. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That sounds good. So now Mark is asking a really interesting question that has pervaded the CDP landscape really for the last 5, 6, 8 years, which is, as CRM positions itself as the heart of customers and their data, even if just for relationships, this gets confused for being a CDP, and some clients fail to see the difference. How would you explain the difference between CDP and CRM? So I'll take a stab at that, Mark, and then Apoorv, you can maybe add some more. It's a great question. We hear it a lot. We think that the evolution of this is that CRM is going to become a service that's decoupled from its data store. It's an accident of history that CRM platforms also were, for many organizations, particularly on the B2B side, of being the authoritative store for customer data. And the reality is they're just not good at that. Salesforce is an awful data management platform. For all the plugins and connectors that it has, it's very difficult to import and export data and events in and out of Salesforce, even if you're in the latest lightning field version, and even if you've been very careful about how you customized it. And so most CRM, I would say all CRM platforms, were really not designed to be this kind of neutral Switzerland of data where they can incorporate data from all the different possible signals and touch points to get a truly unified master customer view with hundreds and hundreds of attributes potentially, and segment building and grouping, and then acting on that data and pushing out to all kinds of non-CRM environments. We just have this legacy of history of kind of lateral integration into our CRMs because we didn't have a CDP, and that, I think, created the misimpression that maybe that was the best place to manage customer data. And I think it's pretty clear that it's not, and in the future certainly won't be as well. So the shorthand answer to that is CRM becomes a service and not a data store. And your data store moves lower. And I'd say the same thing, by the way, about email and outbound marketing as well, including platforms like Marketo.
Yep.
So, Apoorv, anything to add there?
No, I think that makes sense. Each of them, CRM, email marketing, etc., they would often claim they are CDP, but the fact is they are not really good at some of those services that you mentioned. So data ingestion, unified customer profile, and activations, really.
Yeah. So good. Well, we've run 5 minutes over. We haven't been able to get to all the questions, but really appreciate your engagement. Always happy to follow up directly. You can do that with the coordinates that you see on the screen. And so for Scott and Apoorv and the rest of the Real Story Group crew, want to wish you a great rest of your week and see you next time. Bye now.
Bye. Thank you.